Ultra Carry II 45. These lightweight compact 45s can be a challenge to shoot. Let's see how it works at 12 yards. Welcome to Rider's Range. We're at part 18 of the Great Affordable 1911 series, and we are looking at the gun that started my 1911 addiction, the Kimber Ultra Carry II in 45. I think I mentioned somewhere along the line that in a 38-year law enforcement career, I carried, starting out with a revolver, and then the last 24 years of that career I carried a Glock. When I retired, I was real happy with the Glock 27 that I'd been carrying and perfectly content with it. A couple of friends told me that I really should check out a Kimber. Now, if you go back to, about part 9 of the series, where we compared the Colt Lightweight Commander. I said that was the first 1911 I ever owned, and that's all I owned until I stopped into a gun shop several months after I retired, and they happened to have some Kimbers there. I thought, what the heck, I picked one up. It felt so good in the hand. The trigger felt so nice. It followed me home. And that started the addiction. Ultra Carry II, and I also got it with laser grips. I'm not a big fan of using lasers. I'd much rather use iron sights, but then I probably got I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of rounds using iron sights, although we'll talk about sights on this gun in just a minute. This is an alloy framed 3-inch barreled officer size 45, and it's sitting side by side with the Smith & Wesson Pro Series 45 lightweight officer frame 3-inch barrel gun. Picked this one up a few years ago. There's a story behind it, but I won't bore you with that right now. But these are almost identical guns. They're both lightweight, both 45s, and they come in very close weight-wise. The Kimber comes in at 31.6 ounces. That's with a magazine with 7 rounds of 230 grain ammunition in the magazine, plus 1 more for the chamber. Smith & Wesson comes in just 0.3 of an ounce heavier at 31.9 ounces. So there's an awful lot of similarities, but there are some significant differences. So we'll start looking at the top and the front. Kimber comes with, at least this model. Now, I will back up a little bit and say that I don't see the Ultra Carry II in the plain black finish on the website. Just about everything I'm seeing is two-tone. However, their Ultra Covert is probably the closest thing that you're going to find to this, and that is available. So we have a 3-inch slide. It's not melted on this one at all, so it's not one of their Ultra CDP guns that has the melt treatment on it. Squared off corners, and as you can see, this one has wear on corners and all over the place because I carried it a lot. I shot it a lot. It does come with night sights though, and at least this particular one did. In addition to the laser, it's got a good solid post on the front. It does have a partially serrated rear sight, and you know by now that I'm not fond of the 3-dot sight system. This one is okay if I ignore the sights during the daytime. Obviously they're okay at night. There's not a lot of light definition on that between the front and the rear sight though, so it makes it a little difficult for precision shooting, although this does work at 50 yards. Let's see, the Smith & Wesson has 3-dot sights. They're not night sights on this one, and there's about the same amount of light definition each side of the front sight on this. Again, it's squared off corners, not a duty melt treatment, and you're going to notice the traditional Smith & Wesson external extractor. Yeah, it does break up the lines of the pistol. Sorry for you purists, but that's how Smith & Wesson makes them. So that's what it is. No forward cocking serrations on either of these. The rear cocking serrations on the Smith are relatively fine. On the Kimber, they're definitely fairly coarse. Oh, and of course the Smith & Wesson billboard that says, caution, capable of firing with magazine removed. Okay, the lawyers got involved again. Oh, I will also mention that I changed the grips on this and put on some nice G10 grips. But other than that, very similar guns. The safety lever is very similar. It's got a shelf. It's not tapered like it was in the Dan Wesson we just saw in part 17. But they're both positive. No complaints there. The extractors, excuse me, the takedown levers are very similar, except it's striated on the Smith & Wesson, whereas it's checkered on the Kimber. You notice that the hammers are virtually identical. Beaver tails are very similar, a little more of a pronounced memory bump or speed bump on the Smith & Wesson than there is on the Kimber. But even shooting a real high grip on either gun, I've never had any problems with them. The mainspring housings on both of these are checkered. And by the way, this is an aluminum mainspring housing on the Kimber. It's not a plastic one like you see on a lot of others. They're not rounded at all. You know what I like about the officer size frames, I like them rounded. Not the case on either one of these. I think the Kimber is rounding more of theirs now. Let's see, mag wells. Kimber has the edge on this one. It's a little bit more pronounced, a little bit more robust maybe than the Smith. You don't see it as well in the camera, but the Smith does have a mag well that maybe goes a little deeper. It's not quite as steep of an angle. Front straps, Kimber is smooth. The Smith has striations on it. Magazine releases are checkered, virtually identical. 3-hole triggers identical, and as long as we're on triggers. By the way, these guns have been safety inspected, and they are unloaded for this part of the demonstration. Skeletonized 3-hole trigger with an over travel stomp on the Kimber, and it comes out at 4 pounds 7 ounces on an average of 5 pulls. There's virtually no up and down movement, so it's well fitted that way. There's a little bit of take up, typical 1911, just a very slight crisp pull. Short reset, and again, very crisp at 4 pounds 7 ounces. Smith & Wesson, skeletonized trigger, over travel stop, virtually identical to the Kimber. A little more up and down play in this one though than there was in the Kimber. A little bit of take up, no problem with that. Short, crisp, just the slightest amount of creep, but not much. But this breaks consistently at 3 pounds 6 ounces, so a pound lighter than the Kimber. This does have the nicer trigger of the two, there's no doubt about it. So both these guns are bull barrel guns. And I think we mentioned that already. But they're also a little different inside. The Kimber has a ramped barrel, and somewhat typical of aluminum frame guns, at least higher end. Now the Smith & Wesson is an aluminum frame gun, does not have a ramped barrel, but it does have a very nicely throated barrel. And supposedly with aluminum frames, you shoot hollow points out of them a lot, you'll end up starting to have issues with the nose of the hollow point gouging into the aluminum frame. I haven't shot a lot of hollow points out of this, so I can't vouch for that, although I've got an old 1971 vintage Colt Commander aluminum frame that you saw in either part 8 or part 9 of the series. Got a lot of hollow point ammunition, including old 70s vintage Superville through it, and that does not have a ramped barrel. It's just got the feed ramp is right on the aluminum frame. It's still working fine. The fit and finish on these, well, at least the fit anyway. Normally I'll look at the extractor to frame fit. Well, obviously that's not going to work on the Smith & Wesson because it has an external extractor. On the Kimber though, it's actually fairly nicely fitted. It's not perfect. I wouldn't put it to Nighthawk or Wilson quality. Actually, the one that we saw on the Citadel in the previous part to this series was actually fitted just a little bit better. But I'll also look at the ejector to frame fit, and on the Kimber it is nicely fitted, just a little bit nicer maybe than the Smith & Wesson. And I'll look at frame to slide fit, and here's where the Kimber does have an edge. It hasn't had any significant impact one way or the other. Both guns cycle fine. The Kimber does seem to be a little bit better fitted in slide to frame than the Smith & Wesson does. Now, before we talk about price, let's talk about a couple other things on this. These actually have Swartz type safeties, and you can tell if you look right down in there, you can just barely see you can see it better on the Smith. The plunger, we'll put a couple of stills up here. the plunger that activates the firing pin safety. Now, these being Schwartz type safeties, the firing pin block is activated by the grip safety, not by the trigger, so it doesn't have any significant impact on the tuning of the trigger on these. And you'll see that the lever that actuates the firing pin block on the Smith & Wesson is very pronounced, whereas on the Kimber, it's just a small pin that goes up. Take the rear sight off on the Kimber, and the firing pin safety comes out. I haven't tried it on the Smith & Wesson yet, so I'm not sure if it'll work the same way or not. The recoil system on this is just a little bit different between the two guns. There is a takedown hole to put your bent paper clip or the official Kimber takedown tool in the hole on the guide rod to keep the spring system somewhat compressed so you can disassemble it. There isn't one on the Smith, so the recoil spring guide rod comes out with a slide. Take it out in typical fashion to lift it up off the barrel and then pull the barrel out. On the Kimber, it's a dual spring system, but it's round wire springs. On the Smith & Wesson, it's a single spring, but it's a flat wire spring. Doesn't make any difference that I can determine anyway in felt recoil or in function. Again, I haven't counted accurately on this Kimber, but it wouldn't surprise me if I have 2,000 rounds of the Kimber. I know that I've got at least 500 through the Smith & Wesson. Actually, I bought it and went right into an 8-hour training class where we fired about 350 rounds right out of the box. And a little bit of lube on the rails, and that gun ran that whole class just fine, and I put a couple hundred rounds through it since then. So reliability is fine with the captured dual spring or with the single flat spring, either way. So Kimber Ultra Carry II 45, shooting Federal 230. Smith & Wesson Pro Series, compact, lightweight 45, shooting Federal ammunition, 230 grain ball. So they both do work well at 15 yards on the 3-inch bullseye. They're okay running the plates. 25 yards, not a problem. 50 yards, again, we're talking a 3-inch barrel, so there's short sight radius, and the lack of real clear definition between the front and the rear sight is definitely not favorable to shooting at 50 yards. They will work on the silhouettes. That's fine. I wouldn't want to try to bang 10-inch plates all day long with these. Here's where I think the Kimber has just a little bit of an edge in accuracy over that Smith. And even in the class, I found the Smith was not quite what I would like to have for accuracy, although for combat accuracy, it's fine. Both guns work just as well. Smith & Wesson still has theirs in the catalog. It's actually a Performance Center model. Comes in at a little over $1,200 MSRP, about $1,100 as an actual retail price. And used, you can find these for about $900 plus. This particular Ultra Carry II is no longer in the Kimber catalog. The closest thing would be an Ultra Covert, and that's going to run just under $1,500 for MSRP. You can find them on the new market for, well, actually you can find an Ultra Carry II for under $700 on the new market. Put the laser grips on it, and you're going to be talking just shy of $1,000 for it. Used market, we're talking probably $500 without laser grips, about $900 or so with. So comparably priced on the actual market, at least at the used market. The Smith might cost just a little bit more on the new market. Do I have a favorite? Well, yeah, I obviously do. The Ultra Carry II was my first carry 1911, and again, the gun that I attribute to getting me hooked on 1911s. So I still have a fondness for that particular gun. The Smith is a nice working gun, but I don't have that same warm spot in my heart for the Smith. Kimber is my favorite, but as far as a toss-up, whichever one you want, they're both going to work just as well. If the external extractor is a deal breaker for you. Other than that, like them both. If you like these videos, we appreciate a thumbs up, and we appreciate it if you share the videos, subscribe, click on notifications if you haven't done so already, and tell your friends about Riders Range so we can get a little more notice on YouTube. We appreciate comments on this video down in the comment section. We appreciate comments on anything else pertaining to anything that we're doing, or any suggestions on what you'd like to see on Riders Range. Send that to info@ridersrange.com for a complete playlist, and also a couple of short articles that we've written on various things, and I'll be adding more to it in the future at www.ridersrange.com. I want to thank you for visiting Riders Range.
Kimber Ultra Carry II, 25 yards. Start of the silhouette. "12" 8" next to it. Yeah, let's go for a 10. Center of the silhouette, do I think, with this little gun. One more try. Moved it. Says I got one left. I don't think so. I didn't. S&W Pro Series, 25 yards. Silhouette first. 12". 8" next to it. Whoa! That was me. Try it again. Let's go for the silver silhouette. Put the head back. Move the center. Try the 10".